Do I look a little better than usual?
You
Not
do.
not genetically.
You do. You look good. Did you get a
No,
new camera?
no, I upgraded my Wi-Fi to fiber optic.
Oh,
So uploads, like when I would do one of those massive 3-hour uploads, it would take 10 hours. So now it'll take 20 minutes.
yes.
So I'm cooking with grease. Now I
Where
just have to get the OBS thing working on my camera, and I should look, well, I wouldn't want to say professional, but you get the picture.
I get the picture. Actually, you look good. The back is dark.
Yeah, I
You're
did that.
lit. Um,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, I tell people who I do these conversations with, I mean, if you can get fiber because there's no going back. Once you go
Right.
fiber, you're done. It's
Well, my DSL connection here was, shall we say, primitive.
DSL is primitive. I had
Yes.
DSL back in the early aughts.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's reminding me of Alaska during that time too. I think I left Alaska with DSL, and we were pretty like proud of it.
Well, it was a big jump over dial up. I remember that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
So, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Just had a uh little plumbing thing at home. I mean, you just always have those kind of things. I mean, plumbing never, the day before the wife says, "Oh, that tub in the garage, that sure was slow." And then back in my mind, I know, oh, okay, I lived in this house 23 years. This morning the kitchen sink was backing up. I thought, oh
Right,
yeah,
right.
so but
Yeah, there are those just physical things. I was talking with a friend yesterday. I have a pretty educated American friend staying at my house for a few months here, and we're having some pretty interesting conversations. And I'm slowly convincing him that he should start a YouTube channel because he has a lot to say. But I'm not going to mention his name just because he's still incognito. But we were talking, and I just finally said, ultimately, so much of life is about the stuff, the physical stuff. We have to move around. I mean, I'm thinking of trying to get my library from Alaska to here. It's just stuff, walking up the hill, huffing and puffing. It's just gravity and all this stuff.
yep.
But my point that I was actually making with him was that reality isn't the stuff.
Yeah.
Did I don't know, did you have a chance? Are we recording already?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Did you have a chance to listen to the Rookmucker What is Reality ever?
No, no.
Well, you really should.
I saw you posted it, but I haven't listened to it yet.
Yeah, it's already had 1,200 hits, which is pretty amazing for an old 45-year-old recording and such. But I've been listening to your various, not
Uh-oh.
everything, but enough to follow a lot of what you've been talking about. And I've noticed that it's been about, you've been dealing a lot with, the materialistic world versus, the spiritual world, what these kind of, science versus religion and all of these kinds of things. And I thought, I just had this thought, if you're interested, that I think some of my ideas on time might actually be apropos at this moment. And these are like, it's a long 10-part series, but these things come along in about the second half or so.
Okay.
And so you want me to just go ahead?
Go ahead. Give me a
Okay. Well,
TLDR.
I'm not going to in any, it's 10 episodes, so I'm not going to try to boil that down. But I will say this, I had this a lot of things came together in my reading and in my life. And I had this moment where I remember walking down the street and just thinking to myself, it's almost like people don't live in time anymore. It's like they live against time. And then I thought to myself, oh, it's not almost as if, it is in fact. And what I realized is that we spend most of our lives involved in things these days that shortcut the process of time. So whether it's travel or what we're doing here, I mean, for me to actually talk to you face to face, I'd have to well, get on a plane. That cuts a whole lot of time off right there.
Yeah.
And I'd have to go all the way to Sacramento.
Yeah.
And even then, I'm going to take a car, which cuts off a certain amount of time and get to
Yeah.
you. But not only that, so we've organized our lives in such a way, just the word convenience is all about this mystical process of saving time. And then I realized also this gets to the heart of human relationships, because, think about love. People seem so willing, at least for the last 50 years, things are kind of getting weird right now, but people have been so willing to commit their bodies to each other. And then on the next level, their emotions. And then when things get inconvenient, they depart. And what's strange about that is, what's the missing ingredient? Well, it's the worst thing of all. It's commitment. And commitment is the love relationship in time. And I also started to see that faith is a process in time. Words only occur in time. This is, I'm getting from Jacques Ellul in his book, The Humiliation of the Word. Words only exist in time. Now, what we're doing right now, well, what I'm speaking and what you're speaking are just words. We've added to it this layer of video, which we then save and abstract. But the interesting thing about that is, once it's saved and abstracted, it's no longer the straight word. Well, what it is it's a recording of the word. So therefore, it's repeatable and it's starting to enter the visual category. So, but real words, real conversation, face to face, it's not just words we're watching, but it's the whole human behind the word. It's the pauses, it's the little gestures, it's the uncomfortable movings on the seat. Plus, you see when a word hits somebody, you just see that little thing in their face go, huh? Or, oh, you see the reactions. All that's part of the word, but the actual words do not appear anywhere in space. They are completely, now I have worked in audio recording for quite a while. I know very well, I can record my words and then watch the spectrograph and watch the little chart and see the action. But the truth is, if I then come along and watch just those visualizations of my words, there's no meaning. So the meaning of the word, it only happens in time, not space. Meaning happens in time more than space. Now, obviously, both of these things should be in balance. We live a life on Earth, in space, with the stuff, but we also live a life of meaning. And so what we do is that we have a sort of, what is it? We have a meaningful, meaning happens, it's like between things. It's not happening, it's, when you look at a thing, you don't get the meaning from it until you form a relationship to it. So relationships happen in time. And so relationships happen in time. And then I had this idea, and a lot of the problems are, once you cut off the effects of time, you then cut off the meaning of relationships, the meaning of words. Well, what happened was, at a certain point, Rickmacher details this very well. People politely, during the Enlightenment period, pushed God out of the picture because God can't be weighed and measured. So let me actually dive into this right now. So this is where the science issue becomes very important. I think science is very directly a result. I mean, there was science in China, there was science in the Islamic world. And after a while, they were just kind of stuck in the mud doing whatever. I mean, I saw some video the other day saying that one of the turning points in human history was the Islamic Golden Age. To which I'm saying, like, no, I think if that's all we had, we'd all just be doing algebra. We wouldn't have Copernicus and Galileo and Newton. And I think the turning point is when the Christians, having, gratefully been re-exposed to these concepts of mathematics and their rediscovery of the Greek philosophers and, Archimedes and all of this stuff. But they took it, and I think one of the big differences between Islam and Christianity is in Islam, the world is all determined in a way that, it's only if Allah allows. But in Christianity, it's that second chapter of Genesis where God says, investigate everything, name the animals. And the naming isn't just like, naming a dog Bob or something like that. It's naming the dog. It's not calling the tree Susan. It's naming the tree as a tree. And so I think what happened was the Christians, the early Christian scientists, and here's the thing, science is totally a product, this modern science is totally a product of this Christian thing that happened somewhere between the Renaissance and the Reformation. And one of the things they did was they started looking out, Copernicus looks out and says, it's not quite doing what it was supposed to do out in outer space. It's doing something else. I think actually we're going around the sun. It's kind of a radical concept. But, you're just looking and weighing, because the world was open. It wasn't full of taboos. And that's the thing about the Christians that was different than so many other places. We didn't have taboos about what we couldn't look at. So then you get, people often will point out that, the wicked church and Galileo and how they, what they did to him was terrible. Well, keep in mind what they were calling their view of the cosmos actually was coming from Aristotle, and it wasn't based on that. So Galileo remained a Christian. He never said, oh, that's it, I give up, there's no God. Newton believed in God. Descartes believed in God. Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch one, he once said that, he's the guy who first saw the microscopic world through a microscope. And he said, I used to think God created the world. Now I think God created two worlds. You see, so all these people, Francis Bacon in his own kind of strange way, they all in some way believed in God. And one of the things they did, and I think this was by accident, they fell so in love with weighing and measuring things that everything was then put into spatial categories. Galileo has these primary attributes and secondary attributes in reality, in the world. So a primary attribute would be like substance, solidity, and a secondary attribute would be color. And because color is dependent on the eyes. And Owen Barfield points out, well, eventually we come to realize that this solidity thing we think is so strong isn't really that solid either. And so that becomes dependent. And so eventually the only thing left over in the primary category is mathematics, which strikes me as strange because that's completely abstract and unrelated to life. A dog doesn't walk around in a mathematical world. A dog just walks around in the world as is. And you don't need mathematics to get along in the world at all. So, but we became so in love with the processes of weighing and measuring and mathematics and such. Galileo got into pendulums. What they started to do with time was they started to visualize it. And a lot of people get mixed up. They think that time is the clock, it's the duration, but it isn't, because everyone's experience of time is different. So if you take three people, if you take someone who is working just a common humdrum, cashier at McDonald's, or they're probably not using the word cashier anymore. They're probably using, front of office, front of house or something.
Customer service representative.
Thank you. And then you have someone who's just fallen in love. And then you have someone who one of their closest relatives has just died. Now, each of these people are going to inhabit the next duration of, say, an hour, but the way they inhabit that hour will be totally different. The person at McDonald's, for instance, will just be hoping to get through the day and literally will not remember this hour at all. Because if you go back to them and say, what was it like April 26th in 2021 when you were working at McDonald's? They go like, oh, it's the same as I can't, it's the same as the day before and the day after, unless something really big happens to cause a memory there. But the person who's just fallen in love, oh my gosh, that hour is going to go by too quickly, but it's going to be so meaningful, reflecting, oh, I can't believe she said this. Oh, he said that. Oh, I can't, And then the person for whom someone has died, it's just going to be a slow sludge to get through that hour. Now, of course, that's just three abstract people. It gets much more personal depending on who you're talking to and all of their history. And so I think what happened was that when they were weighing and measuring things, they kind of opened up this trap door, opening the door up for the Enlightenment. So that, well, we can't weigh and measure God. So maybe God doesn't exist. And once you open that door, the rest of the door that starts to open is everything else in time. And that is to say, time is about relationships. One of the things that's very clear to me is that right now, if you look at the subatomic particles, it used to be, we thought that the world was made of matter. And yes, there is matter. There are these little particles, and somehow they hold together to form things. And we are held together of little bits and particles of matter. But the truth is, it isn't the matter that's important. It's the space between them. It's the relationships of everything. So that why do things appear the way they do? The mystery isn't that there's something there spinning, these little protons and neutrons and quarks and all of this. The real mystery is what holds them together? What is the relationship? But the concept of relationship goes back and back and back to everything. So, what is the problem with our environment right now? Our relationship to it. And we have treated it as a physical, materialistic object based on the hardening of science. See, I think the original science was great, but then you start getting to scientists who basically say, well, all there is the stuff, and our math is the most important thing. And what we see walking around, well, that's, or actually, a friend of mine who is a biologist, I've had two different kinds of friends in the biology field. I had one who dealt with things in the lab, kind of molecular biologist type. And then I had another who is a field biologist who studies turtles, but also things in Alaska. And to the molecular biologist who thinks they're dealing with the reality because they're dealing with the abstraction and the stuff, they look at the guy in the field, and I've heard this actually said as being almost like the occult. What are you doing out there with looking at that bear and studying it? As if that which we form relationships with is not nearly as important as the abstract, theories that we come up with about these things. And Rookmacher says a very important thing, and he says this in his What is Reality? He says, you see what you know, which also means you don't see what you don't know. And then he points out John Locke said, no, you just know what you see. All there is what you weigh and measure. But Rookmacher says, you're right, Mr. Locke, but you have reduced reality to that which is measurable. And it's quite clear that's not the entire story. So the problem is following the materialistic line of science, having left out this time component. See, the time component isn't just, it takes an hour for X event to happen, or we measured it within an hour. That's reducing it to a visual component. What the time component is right.
Hang on a second. I got to get the mail. You can keep talking. I just got to get the mail because our mailbox got stolen.
Go for it. So basically what that means is that, where am I? Okay, time, Tarkovsky says time is personal. And that means that we all inhabit time differently, like what I was saying about the different kinds of time. But the truth is, physics in the 20th century started to come to the same conclusion. So that in chaos science and quantum theory, in information theory, they started to see these sorts of things, so that you can stare at a waterfall all you want and it'll never look the same twice, but it'll always look like a waterfall. And that's like chaos theory. So, the truth is, everything actually, Einstein said, that Einstein, of course, made the big discovery of time and space. And the interesting thing is the time in Death Valley is slightly different than the time on the top of Mount Everest, which is very odd. You see, in time, everything has a unique position. What science does is it takes a slide of blood, looks at it, and says, well, this is what's happening for everything that this blood is attached to. But, then you go to the hospital, and if they treat you like that, you know it. You've been treated mechanistically. And the truth is, it's never that simple. Every case is different. Everyone is different. So what I came to understand is that, now what's interesting is that there's a kind of a hierarchy of sciences, with physics being on top, and then, chemistry, biology, and others being on the bottom, and then almost in the occult realm is things like psychology, so that, but here's the thing, what they discovered in physics takes a while to dribble down to the other sciences. So biology is still very mechanistic. And, when people start telling me, we are based upon, that the chemistry is causing us to do things and all of this, I'm going like, no, you've got it wrong. And Michael Polanyi, in his book Personal Knowledge, talks about boundary conditions. And what he says a boundary condition is like, say, I'm water. I have so much water inside of me. That's a boundary condition. So that, I don't know, it's, more than half of my body is water. Generally, that doesn't affect me day to day. That is to say, if I get enough liquid and, I don't have diarrhea and it's not too hot and I'm not drinking poisoned water, I don't think about it. The fact that I'm made of water doesn't tell me about why I'm speaking to you. Neither does DNA. DNA is another boundary condition. It's a more elaborate boundary condition, but DNA doesn't tell me, again, what my words mean. It has nothing to do with that. So I think if we actually have to turn it around, science tries to take the smallest abstraction to explain the larger phenomenon. But I think it's the other way around. We have to start with the most complex thing, and which we do. We start with the most complex thing, our brain. We look at a slide and we do come up, obviously the stuff is important. The materialistic world is important. It's important enough that, we have made many discoveries in medicine. We have been able to send, a rocket ship to Mars and have some little thing get out there and probe it and send images back to us. That's pretty amazing. But that doesn't explain why we exist,
Or even why we sent the rocket ship to Mars.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, there's many things we can do in the world, and we do a lot of things, right. But why? Right. I mean, and that, you're a little bit older than I am, and so you very much remember, I mean, all of the hullabaloo about the Apollo program and all the excitement, but then it all peters out basically because people get to the point of, we're going there because it's a rock.
Well,
And you see this with the question of why the Chinese didn't,
Right.
go out and take the world. Well,
Right.
they just, why should we?
Well, as Larry Norman sang in one of his songs, they brought back a lot of rocks. They must have been really nice rocks. Because that's what we got out of it, and that and a nice picture of the earth.
That's right.
And but no, I mean, you see, the thing is, all of our technological advances, all our scientific advances did not answer the question of who we are.
Right.
And then what happened was there was this ripple effect from the Enlightenment and the science that came from that perspective, which then started to say, well, maybe, okay, it starts off, okay, we just put God out of the picture, human life should go fine. And then eventually you start saying stuff to yourself, well, is it, Freud comes along and goes, is it love? No, it's really libido. And, so we try to, or nowadays it's love. No, it's more of a chemical reaction. It's the pheromones and it's this and that. The people have, in other words, what's happened is all the things, I think joy, love, truth, beauty, all these big qualities that used to be so important are all categories that are relationships in time. And I think I think the most evil person on the world would be the person who could get things done just by wanting it done, just by imagining it done, and having someone bring it to them instantly. That is to say, they would be the person who could violate time the greatest. And I think we live in a world now where there is so little meaning because we no longer live in time. We live against time. Rather than accept time, that things take a while, we live against time. And so that's why I think that we have so many problems. See what's happened, and if Rickmacher is right about you see what you know, I think, and adding to this some of the thoughts of Barfield, I think when you look at the past, we don't understand the past because we only see what we know. And in our lifetime, we're both old enough to have seen what we know change radically, but it hasn't changed radically in terms of meaning. It's changed radically to strip the meaning. It's like paint stripper. It's stripping the meaning. So all the life lived online, it has not added to the meaning. It has made it more difficult to see the meaning. Or as Paul Virilio, a Catholic thinker who died a couple of years ago, really interesting thinker, he said, every new device we invent for seeing is one more degree to which we can't see. Because we put the thing in front of us. There's a difference on the simplest level between using your eyes and putting glasses on or looking through a window. And you can tell there's a difference. The sun hits you differently. You don't feel certain things. When you have glasses, you always kind of have to try to get your forehead grease off of them and whatnot. It's, but the more, we had cameras and we had television and we had film and we had photos. And that's why our lives have become these very strange things where people, I saw this in Alaska, tourism. By the way, I have a really great series coming up called Tourism and Reality. But I would see this where people would come off of a huge floating hotel cruise ship. They would walk, the town I lived in was just majestically surrounded by mountains. They're walking off a fjord into mountains. There's going to be bears. They might have seen whales on the way. And what are they looking at when they walk off the ship? Their phones. And to me, that says it all. That's our world. And when they get to places, what do they do when they get there? If there's a bear in the background, they want a selfie.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. And that can get dangerous. It's my job to prevent them from meeting reality.
Well, you're in a Rickmacher's point. I really do like that line. You see what you know, and that you know, when you look at, say, I really like Peterson's conversation with Roger Scruton,
Yes.
because that's exactly where he went there. And he said, you know, what do we see? Well, we basically see what we know. And these other little, you see this all the time between people. And you see this especially online and something like Twitter, where it's very low resolution. You're just constantly projecting onto
Right.
everything you see on Twitter, all of your own things. And
Right.
even in relationships, you know, romantic relationships, it takes a fairly long time to actually see through what you're massively projecting onto that other person, to have them slowly emerge up from your projection based on, you know, the interaction. And I really like the way you laid all of this out. And it, you know, you who have done so much interesting thought and work on media and film, you know, and I don't know to what degree you're living this, where you're living it now, but you know, we both grew up in a world in which television was really coming to the fore. And
Hmm.
I grew up in the New York metropolitan area. So we had probably the most channels that anybody had on TV. You know, we had,
Right.
you know, 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And
And you had Joe Franklin and Crazy Eddie. So
yes, we did. We certainly did. And so, and then of course you go to cable TV. So you have the
mhm.
multiplication. And now, of course, with streaming, it is it is really amazing to me how, just on now on my smart television in my home, with a handful of streaming services, plus, you know, I got an Amazon Fire Stick so I could do the recast thing, so I could have local channels. My wife didn't want to have wires, so I do all these gymnastics to avoid wires, which she hates because I've made her live with wires all these years. Um, but the amount of programming available to me now, as compared to when I was a child with a television in the New York City area,
Mhm.
it's just staggering. And then
Oh,
I watch, you know, my family members and other people just scrolling through even just Netflix. I can't find anything to watch on Netflix. And it's like, you know, when I was a kid, I would have sat down and just, you know, you just turn on something. I had 7 or 8 choices. And then of course the VHS came along, and we could go and rent a movie, and that was, you know, transformational. We could see a movie. I mean, what's your take on this? With what's going on with us and seeing and knowing? Because it
well,
very
let
much
me
seems like has everything to do with time.
it does, absolutely. But here's an interesting thing. Do you remember when you were younger, you would get a roll of film and put it in your camera? Of course, you had to be very careful not to expose it to the light, and sometimes you did, or sometimes it didn't click and you didn't take any of the photos. So you had anywhere from 12 to 24, sometimes 36 frames that you could expose.
Yep.
You weren't probably a great photographer. I wasn't when I was young. I'm better now. But you know, it was you would take these, and then when you got them, there was the process of waiting for them. Now, at a certain point, it used to take a couple of days, and then they had
1 hour
overnight
photo.
service, and then it became 1 hour photo,
Right.
right? But here's the thing, when you got your photos, you would often look through them and you say, okay, that's not good. That's not good. That's not good. Oh, here's a nice one. And then you would take it, maybe put it in a photo album, the good ones, the best. And then sometimes what would happen in the family is people, hey, let me show you my photos. And you'd sit down and you would open the book and share your photos. Here's how photos work now. We have endless photos of ourselves. I mean, literally, I have a friend who's probably taken, I would conservatively estimate 50,000 photos of his children from the time they were born until now. And they were in their teens. Um, then when I watch people I watch people uh, because I worked in tourism, taking photos. And so they're floating past eagles, they're watching bears and stuff. And what do? They will come to you afterwards, and then they'll show you nowadays it's their phone, and they'll just swipe through. Oh, look at this one, look at this one, look at this one, look at this one. And guess what? That's the most anyone's ever going to see of these things. They've just simply
Yeah.
And so it's very weird. The more we have the ability to take unlimited photos, the more worthless the photos become. So I don't know about you. I have, I think, about 10 photos of myself before the age of 10.
Oh yeah. Uh, I sometimes because I'm always working on something, and I think, boy, it sure would have been nice to have a few. It sure would have been good to have taken a few pictures during. I mean, this huge area of my life. My father took some. You can find some
Right,
random pictures up, but it's like a photo desert until
right,
the
right.
smartphone and until I got my first my digital DSLR.
But consider this. So I've been working on this Rookmacher project. I just put another one up of his views of scholarship, which is actually reality part 2. And he talks about the difficulties. He has 4 points. He says everything in scholarship is uncertain. He says part 2, there are many, many things in the world that are totally certain. He does kind of things. Part 3, we all see things through our different colored glasses. So each person and each philosophical leaning looks through things with different colored glasses, depending on all the things that go into your life and your thoughts. And finally, the mystery is we can actually communicate. And that's his points. But in doing these Rookmacher things, I been in contact with his daughter, Marlene, and I asked her, send me all the pictures of Rookmacher you can, where he's like teaching or in some way, just whatever you got. Do you have any visual of film images or anything? So she did. There's about 20. And one home movie that shows him a couple, I would say if you added up the amount of time he's in the movie, it's about, I don't know, 30, 35 seconds. That's it. That's all the visual documentation on Rookmacher in the prime of his life. And you know what? Makes each of those photos a whole lot more valuable.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is the movie that I had that she sent me. It was filmed in Dutch Libri, and I showed part of it in my lecture just as an illustration of something. That is to say, not the Rookmacher part, but here's some people walking down a road kind of thing. And one of my YouTube subscribers said, "That's me." He saw himself. He didn't know this film existed. And I said, "Great, I'm going to send you this film." And and he said it was just such an incredible thing to him. He lives in Australia now. And I thought to myself, that's the power of the film, of the image. But the more you have of a thing, the more. But here's the interesting thing. People are always taking photos of things they're supposed to take photos of. So, like, even if you go to Disney World, there'll be a place that says photo spot. So you go up to this photo spot, you get a picture of the castle, you go to the next one, get a picture of the monorail or whatever. And you're sitting there saying to yourself, and then the next person comes up and does the same thing. And this is what I saw in the Louvre, Mona Lisa, and there were other big things too, like Winged Victory. And everyone's just getting that shot.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, it lessens the Mona Lisa. And Walker Percy has an interesting essay called The Loss of the Creature. I have a copy of it if you want me to send it to you sometime. It's really fascinating. He makes a thought. He says, is looking like sucking. The more you do, the less there is. See,
Walker Percy is a very interesting guy.
Yeah. And he talks about, for instance, the Grand Canyon. He says, you go to the Grand Canyon. Now, you're already in trouble. First of all, the words Grand Canyon tell you, but it's not just that. You've already seen probably movies of it. You've seen pictures of it. You've seen all these lovely, national park porn. It's just these images. And then you get there and it's an overcast day. And you say, this doesn't look like the pictures.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he says you have a preformed symbol complex is the word he used. So that what you do is you're looking through this set of images that's been put there before you. And he talks about Cardenas, who was the first Westerner to discover the Grand Canyon. And he says, you will never have the experience of Cardenas.
Yeah.
Because Cardenas was just kind of going along with on a horseback with his caballeros, and then breaking through the mesquite is El Grande Cañon. It's just like they were just like stunned. They called it the Grand Canyon. To them, it was truly grand. It's this amazing thing. He says, but then he says, well, how can you recover the creature? He says there are different techniques that people have tried to use. One is to find to find an alternative way of looking at it. So instead of taking the trail, you get off the trail. You try to look at it in a new way. But he says the problem with that is, for instance, so you cut through a trail and you find this great new vantage point that no one rarely goes to at the Grand Canyon. And eventually the National Park Service gets wind of it. And then they look at your trail and they go like, actually, that's a pretty nice trail. Let's get everyone else to watch this.
Yeah.
Look at this. So it only lasts for a little while. He says another possibility is to look over the shoulders of the people looking there. So you go there, and I did this when I went to the Mona Lisa. I didn't go to see the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. I did go to look at some art, but I didn't go to see the Mona Lisa. But I did go to see the crowds at the Mona Lisa. So I have a video of this on my Gravity from Above channel of just the crowds looking at it. So he says, what you're doing is you're not looking at the thing itself. You're looking at the way it's consumed and digested. He says back in the day, New Yorker articles were often like in this mode. It's almost takes a superior sense of the self. He says, imagine, here's a way to see the Grand Canyon differently. So let's say it's World War II, and this really happened. And no one was going to the national parks in World War II. So what they did was they took the Bright Angel Lodge on the north rim, which is the more beautiful rim. Most people see the south, but the north is where the action is. But they turned the Bright Angel Lodge into a recuperation center for US soldiers in the war. So imagine this. You're wounded in battle. You're unconscious. You wake up out of a coma or something, or you're finally able to see the bandages are undone. And outside your window is the Grand Canyon. See, now you've rediscovered the creature. And he gives one more example. And he says, you go there with a loved one. It's just like you're with your wife or whatever, you're with your husband, and you're having the most horrific argument you can possibly have. You're in tears, you're trying to discuss things are going nowhere, and you're right on the edge of the Grand Canyon. So it's because the thing has been lost through our looking. And I think this goes back to science, weighing and measuring, and not seeing the relationships of things, putting everything into abstract boxes so that we can no longer touch. It's like we make the thing, what photography does is it makes available to everyone what the scientist does when they weigh and measure. You can also turn photography into an art, which is different. But I think the secret is that everything is a relationship. And that's why Tinder is such a problem. Anything that tries to shortcut a process that should take a while gets to be a problem. So whether it's fast food or travel, or, it's just like 2-week travel vacation in Europe. And I can tell you, you're just going to be rushing from place to place. And what you'll see is the stuff you're supposed to see.
Right.
And
Well, and no, I think this is all really good. And it's very helpful. I mean, you just put down so many interesting ideas there. It's going to take a little time for me to sort of chew through them. Especially I like what you just walked out in terms of Walker Percy, because I think about Um, but I've never been to Europe. My parents have never been to Europe. At some point, I think I will get to Europe. And when now I'm in this strange position that when I go to Europe, let's say, well, it's a tougher sell. I mean, even though just via you, I'd love to visit Tbilisi, Georgia, because I've never thought of Georgia. About the only thing I ever knew of Georgia is that where Joseph Stalin came from, and that's hardly a selling point. But but then, you know, I, because of you, I look at some of the videos, and then I do some of the background, the pictures. I think, wow, that is a whole world that most Americans just, you know, because then I think about, well, at some point I do want to get to Europe. And so let's say I go to the UK. Now I've got people who watch my channel that I converse with semi regularly in the UK. And if I go to the Netherlands, of course, I have to visit Job, but I'm going to have my wife with me because she's never been to Europe. And the last thing she wants to do is follow me around as I spend, you know, 3 days talking with Job about stuff we talk about that she's not in the room, and where she'd like to, okay, what would we see in the UK? What would we see in the Netherlands? And we're only just talking about the tiniest, tiny little bits of Europe. But you're exactly right. Is like, okay, well, these are all the major things. When my wife and I were dating, and she first came to New Jersey with me, and she wanted to see New York. I said,
Hmm.
great. I said, what do you want to see? She gave me this whole list. Of course, I lived outside of New York, so I'd been there all these times. And so I said, no, we can't do this. She's like, no, you're just, you know, you're sandbagging me. I said, okay, sweetheart, let's have priorities. Tell me what you want to see most. So Statue of Liberty. I said, okay. Do you want to go up and down in the thing? She said, absolutely. I said, okay, just keep your list. We'll just start there. And of course, anybody who's done the Statue of Liberty knows that
Right.
was the day. And actually, she never
Exactly.
left. She never really left New Jersey. I don't care what the state of New York says, but that's another thing. Uh,
I
but
get it. I get
but
it.
but that's such an interesting idea. You know, so I live quite close to Yosemite National Park. I love going to Yosemite National Park. I visit it regularly. During the pandemic, my wife and I, because there's so little things you can do, what we've sort of done during this pandemic is every week she and I just sit in the car and we drive for about 8 to 10 hours. And we've just been going all through Northern California, all these back roads. I mean, just stunningly beautiful places where nobody is around and nobody lives. And it's, you know, it's amazing to me. But then you go to Yosemite, and which we go regularly, but it's there's very much this thing. My children are always complaining to me because I take pictures of what everybody else takes pictures of. And it's like, well, what am I trying to do with my umpteenth picture of Half Dome? Am I trying to approximate Ansel Adams? What exactly am I trying to capture? What
Right.
am I doing? And it's like, I
Exactly.
do this and I don't even know what I'm doing.
Right. No, the truth is, back in 1980, I discovered Susan Sontag's book on photography. I don't agree with everything she says, but that caused me to think about what I was doing with photography so much that I didn't take another photo till 1993.
Oh my.
Yeah. But then what happened was I rediscovered the photos I took of my Jesus People days.
Huh.
And I realized, wow, this really captures a time.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
And then I realized in New York City, I'm in a time now.
Yeah.
And I need to capture it. And that's when
Yeah.
I started taking photos again. And then I realized that the point of the photos for me was for me to look at things and to see them in new ways, but also to take photos of people, to document the people I wanted to remember and how I wanted to remember them, how I saw them. And I am so glad I did, because I captured my last few years in New York City very well. And I think, again, the problem with travel is everyone is sold through, you know, you're watching Rick Steves or you're watching YouTube channels, and you get these views. Now, I've watched Rick Steves enough and been to, you know, quite a few of the places he talks about to know how I would, this is the kind of the thing is like, okay, I'm going to have to enter into this thing and try to explain what's going on with tourism, because it's a lot more complicated than it seems. And I think actually tourism is it's actually deforming reality, because what it's done is turned reality into a consumer product. So, for instance, one of the things that often happens in any tourist place is that there will be, variations on the culture that used to be there presented to you. So if
Yeah.
you go to certain, Wild West towns or ghost towns, there'll be things to, remind you of the ghost towns. You can go to Skagway, Alaska, and take the train up in the mountains, and there's people like doing kind of theatrical productions of, the gold mining era and such. All of these are totally fake. That is to say, they don't. I often, in 1998, they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Skagway Klondike Gold Rush. And I said, it's really interesting. They're celebrating 1998. In 1998, they're celebrating 1898. Will anyone ever celebrate 1998? No, because it didn't exist. 1998 was just simply the commercialization of 1898. You can go to Sitka, Alaska, and they have these Russian dancers there. None of them are actually Russian. There aren't really that any Russians hardly left at all there. Maybe a Orthodox priest and some natives who are still Orthodox. But essentially, that's just there for the tourists.
So what are we doing? I'm thinking about Holland, Michigan, because I didn't grow up there, but I went to Calvin College eventually with a bunch of
Right.
kids who did the Klompen dance at tulip time, and
Right.
I lived in the
Well,
Dominican Republic for a while
yeah.
in this little town where the country was really trying to get some tourism going in that little town. It just never succeeded. But as when I lived there in the country, when people would come to visit, we'd take people down to certain areas of the capital, the colonial district of the capital, where you had some old buildings. You had a little tourist trap, and we'd take people there. And people come out to California sometimes. We'll take them to Alcatraz, and we'll go to the pier in San Francisco. But you always, when people come to California, I like to say, if there's one place I want to take you, I want to take you to Yosemite. And we're going to go down to the valley, and you're going to get your picture of Half Dome and El Capitan. But what we really should do is just find a little out of the way place. This is what my wife and I like to do in these national parks. Find a little out of the way place that's far enough from the road, and maybe go sit in, because they're usually canyons out here at West, go sit in the river for a few hours, or, find some little quiet spot. So, but
Mhm.
so it's really interesting to me, this tourism and reality business, because you're right, we sort of package it and commodify it. And of course, Disney and Vegas, and I don't know if you saw the first season of Westworld.
No, I did.
It's all this, it's one part nostalgia.
Mhm,
It's,
mhm.
it's a very strange thing.
Yeah. Well, we've done something to ourselves, but it tourism turns out, it seems like something that's like the froth on the top of the latte, but it's something much deeper. And here's the weird thing. Now, I've spent time in Paris, spent time in London, spent time in Prague, spent time, well, obviously here, spent time in Alaska, spent time in New York, spent time in San Francisco, spent time in Los Angeles. I've spent time in a lot of places and watched the tourism. And I've been personally involved with tourism in Alaska. I've been to Prague and watched it change
Hmm.
over the years through tourism. And I'm watching what's happening here as they want tourism. And I'm
Huh.
also watching the collapse of economies right now because tourism isn't happening.
Right.
I'm
Right.
also watching the amount of pollution generated through tourism is staggering.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You
You see
know,
that in the Dominican Republic. And people, I mean, prostitution and tourism. I mean, people often don't
prostitution.
talk about that, but
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
prostitution and tourism is like this.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sex tourism.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, hello Thailand. you know, um, and also it's what is it? It's fed to us. Here's where the rubber really meets the road. What do people say in small town America, in small suburb America, about why they want to get out of there. There's nothing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do they want to go?
Yeah.
They want to go to these places that are sold to them.
Hmm.
And it's this very strange thing. I think if there's I've got one of the episodes I want to do out of these 10 episodes is going to be the emptying out of, there's this guy named Nick Johnson who has a channel that's very interesting where he drives around America and just shows you what he'll go say. He just did one, I think the 10 worst places in, Ohio. And he'll drive through them. And what you'll see is these small towns with boarded up windows, and the towns have just become meth labs. They've been destroyed by the Walmarts, but they've also been destroyed by the fact that these towns, if you went back to the 1950s, 60s, maybe even in the 70s,
Yeah.
you would have seen actual life in these towns,
Yeah.
people coming and going, talking and stuff. But more and more, the towns become shadows of themselves, very dark shadows.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, tourism grows. Meanwhile, everyone wants to go live in a big city. I think all what we're seeing right now for the last year and change, it goes on, is changing that equation a bit.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
are Idaho
again, this is the 60s and 70s in some ways. There's a lot of repetition in there.
Right, exactly. So I think that, but we are so susceptible to what Walker Percy calls the preformed symbol complex. We are so susceptible to that, and so people have these images that they are fed, and that it's just like Ireland is green, and you just see going through the hills. Holland has those cute little canals and old buildings, and Switzerland, the Alps. Oh my goodness. And you could take a train up to the Matterhorn. And what they're not telling you is, they're not telling you about the fact that Ireland is a pretty modern place, where a lot of it is, it's not the old Ireland of, that it's not all the green stuff. Holland is not all little canals and quaint buildings. There's also a really dark underbelly to places like Amsterdam and such. You try to get to the Matterhorn, good luck. It's one of the most crowded places on earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
it's Yosemite Valley too. I mean, I never go there. I avoid there in the summer because, oh gosh, I mean, if I want to sit in traffic, I'll drive to the Bay Area.
Oh yeah. No, that's the thing. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's been since the 90s since I went to Yosemite, but even then it was just insane, and I think that we are creating this very strange world for ourselves. And, and when you factor in that how this relates to not only the economy, but the governments of countries, particularly small countries that only, they live for tourism.
Yeah.
There's a great little weird documentary that you can find on YouTube called Cannibal Tours, and it's set in New Guinea, and it was in the late 80s, I think it was, maybe early 90s, and it was about the first tourist ships coming to New Guinea. And what's great about this documentary is you have mostly Germans and Italians, a couple of Americans here, so everything's translated, but they also subtitle the things that the natives are saying, the tribes people are saying. So at one point, they're sitting on these something like tapa cloths or something on the ground, the tribes people, and the tourists are coming up, and they show this rich German tourist come up, and he's got his camera and everything, and he looks down, and there's a carved mask made of wood. And he's saying, how much for that? And she says something like $10. And he goes like, $5. And then here's the translation of the woman turning to her friend after he walks away. She goes like, I don't know why they say this tourism is so good for us. I spent 6 months working on that. And then a little bit later, another tourist is wanting to get a picture posed with one of the tribesmen. They've since converted to Christianity and are no longer cannibals, but he wants to get a picture of the guy in his tribal regalia with like a spear, like he's going to kill him and eat him. And to me, those images in a nutshell say everything that is the horror of tourism. It's this creation of this completely artificial, it's a strange relationship that we have created to the actual earth and its people. It starts in Switzerland back in the early Romantic era. But what's happened over the years is it's gone from being the grand European tour to being, now everyone can just hop on a plane and go anywhere. and so as we can hop on a plane and go anywhere, the nowhere we are from becomes more and more strange to us. And yet we don't actually see the places we're going to see. We get a glimpse of them. Or as Rookmacher says, Americans now, but now I think we can say people around the world, because he was talking in the 70s. He says, used to be people go to the same place every year to take their vacation.
Yeah.
Now he says, I think we're just chasing reality and as soon as there's a danger of discovering it, we leave.
Do you think this is related to recorded music? Because again, music used to be, you would spend a good part of your life developing your capacity to make music. And then there would be performance music, which would be to a degree relational. And then of course, as things scale up, now you've got theaters in which now you've got some distance between performance. One of the things I remember about Walker Percy is he had this terrific piece that he wrote about the difference between a high school science lab and the kid on a beach who stumbles across a dogfish washed up on the shore, and he's got a penknife and he's sort of cutting it open. And so it seems to me there's some of that relationship, that you spend your life developing this capacity to make music and you inhabit the music and the music is yours. And then of course, once you get recorded music, now I'm playing this music in order to play, in order to approximate. And you have this in church all the time now, where we've got all of this recorded Christian music. And then, now here in church, we're sort of singing these songs that we have listened to 50 or 100 times, that have been all professionally done. I mean, is it that kind of relationship?
You've just stepped into like the major hornet's nest of all of my thinking.
I know, that's why I step in.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I started essentially.
Right.
Here's what I've learned. What recording did was it began to be a substitute for the live musician. So for instance, we all know the phrase, the jukebox. And the jukebox is, you punch in a few numbers and you play your song. The jukebox got its name because they started putting them in juke joints. And juke joints were these places down south where, and it was often, on different sides of the tracks, but, kind of the kind of iffy bars, you might say, slightly sleazy, a little bit underbelly, but you'd have your blues musicians and such playing there. Well, when they put the jukebox in, they no longer needed the blues musicians. They could just play the records. In the classical world, as recording got better and better, the orchestras had to get more and more mechanical, like a metronome, to approximate the recording. People, one of the things that's very interesting is that there's been a movement in the last 50 years in different ways to try to play certain Baroque era pieces and early classical pieces the way they were meant to be played.
Right.
And they sound much more, like Vivaldi's Four Seasons on a contemporary recording should now sound much more like it sounded in the past. But if you heard it, an older recording, it sounds kind of like very like grand and kind of stately, but it doesn't have that light, skipping, almost dance-like quality that the originals had.
Right.
the real big culprit here is less the recording than the microphone.
Hmm.
The microphone changes the relationship of everything, because what happens is,
Similar to the camera.
well, different in that the microphone immediately creates a relationship between the person holding it and the people listening to it, because you also have the amplification system. And the person holding it is more godlike.
Right.
So it's not a mystery that you started getting fandom of a crazy nature when you started getting microphones. So Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, you know, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, uh, Led Zeppelin. All these people would be nothing. Well, not nothing, but they would be much less had they not have amplification in the way they do. Or as Pete Townsend of The Who once said, if you want to understand what power is in rock music, you plug your guitar into an embankment of Marshall amplifiers. You crank them up to 10 and you play for a stadium. And you control the entire 50,000 people once you hit that power chord. That's what technology does. The next layer added on top of that was the video. So the video changes the relationship of music to people entirely. One of the things that happens along the way also is in the beginning of, I do in my study on minstrel music, I talk about the origins of commercial music. And what I point out is that commercial music, or what we might call pop music, but I like to call it commercial music, is to music what McDonald's is to a hamburger. And that is to say, it is a repeatable commodity that emphasizes the aspects that everyone likes. So in a McDonald's hamburger, you know, in fast food in general, you have your basic, you know, you have sweet, you have salty, you have fat. These are the three keys, you know, because that's what our tongues go like, woo, I'm happy. And, you know, a little bit of tang, a little bit of heat, a little bit of this, but those three things in different forms are the ones that really make us go, yeah. Well, in music, the things that make us go, yeah, are emotion. But there's a difference between, say, deep emotion and commercial emotion. So, you know, just as there's a difference between home cooking, your homemade hamburger, where you might put some real Swiss cheese on your hamburger and maybe, you know, fry up some thick bacon instead of some thin McDonald's bacon, and put on your own special sauce and grill it on a grill. And, you know, you see, suddenly it's all, I'm starting to get hungry wanting that, you know, that's the real thing. And it's got real flavor to it. You put real quality and care into it. Again, it's the relationship. But in music, what it is that what sells is emotion, but it's not genuine emotion. Sometimes there is an overlap between what's popular and what's good. That is to say, what's actually good music. So one could say certain parts of the Beatles' work is good music, and it's also popular. But then again, if one listens to Britney Spears, one can't really say the same thing. One has to say it's essentially just commercial music.
Poor
It
Britney.
just,
Poor Britney.
poor Britney. I don't mean to dump on her. There's a lot of artists that for whom that is true.
Yeah. Well, they're
And
commodified. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, this has been a trope in pictures, and I mean, we've
but
watched this industry.
but it starts back in the minstrel era, where you have men putting on blackface, and the second song in a minstrel show after the exciting song was always the plantation song.
Hmm.
And the plantation song was a slow, mellow song about life, this emotional life on the plantation, of which the singers, and interestingly enough, minstrel music starts in New York City, the singers knew nothing about. So they're inventing this world. I mean, and the music doesn't sound like, you know, slow black folks music. It sounds like, well, yeah, the truth is, it sounds an awful lot like barbershop quartets. and Broadway musicals, because in fact, that is the origins of these things. There's this, the origins of all this syrupy, cheap music come out of this imitation of emotion.
That's
And
that's another form of tourism. I mean, we're talking about the same thing here, because
yeah,
it's the production of the romantic, nostalgic plantation in the South.
right.
And I see cultures do that. I mean, in the Dominican Republic, they keep doing this for the cane fields.
Right.
And the cane fields, nobody in their right mind would.
With torture.
That's right. Would want to work a cane field with a machete. I mean, I worked with people who did that, and boy, they'd sure as heck like to get out of that work. It's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing is that this this artificial emotion becomes the dominant point in music, but it's in the 1870s. Guess where it shows up in music? Give you a hint, you work in one.
In the church.
Uh-huh.
Well, and again, the church is so.
Here's where it shows up. It starts showing up. There's a specific style, and it's called gospel song, not to be confused with gospel music. And gospel song is the kind of music that Ira Sankey would sing before a Dwight L. Moody evangelistic rally, that Homer Rodeheaver would sing before a Billy Sunday service, that George Beverly Shea would sing before a Billy Graham rally. They had these singers doing this to create this sense of emotion. So there are certain songs, I mean, one that's to me the most egregious of all is In the Garden. You know, he walks with me and he talks with me. Just like, but by the end of the 20th century, you're going to be getting
it's corn syrup.
Nice pretty girls singing love songs to Jesus, that really sound erotic in some strange way. But you see, what happened was, what it is it's romanticism, the philosophical strain, poured into commercialism in a way of finding a way to sell it. That's the same thing that's happening in tourism. Tourism is the older romantic movement poured through a commercial industry to sell you a trip somewhere.
Okay, so let's get into the question. Okay, I think we got lots of examples of this in various ways, and we note that it's certainly commercial. Now, we've used the word artificial. I mean, we're certainly right now in this. It's so funny to me how people will say, I just really want an experience of the authentic. I says, you can come to my church. We got authenticity all over the place. And usually once people see it, it's like, hey, you want to cut a cane field? Go for it. That kind of authenticity you don't want. But it's so what exactly are we talking about here? Because we would say, this is inauthentic. This is artificial. There's a sense of Henry Ford. This is mass produced.
Right. Let me pull two things apart though.
Okay.
Artifice can be good. That is to say, when you go to a theater, you want to see someone put on artifice to become something else. That's what you're paying for. You're paying to see someone act, which is an artifice.
Yes.
So the artificial by itself isn't necessarily bad.
Okay.
But it's the substitution for the reality of the thing, for this other image of the thing, which is not authentic. So what is it? Like you have, see what's happened in the churches, and I think this is one of the main reasons why people have fled, is that this artificial thing, but really this inauthentic substitute. Let's just use the Baudrillard word, the simulacra. There you go. The simulacra of Christian music has made it so that if you're not in the church and you walk in and you hear this stuff and you just go like, oh my goodness, I'm just getting sick to my stomach listening to it. You know, I mean, think of a song like "Shine, Jesus, Shine." If you if you've ever heard that, you know, you're starting to think about diabetic shock, insulin shock. You know, it's and yet I actually heard that once at a funeral. I just really, I was aghast that anyone would sing such a thing at a funeral.
But in a weird way, and this is this is sort of where I come to when, because I mean, we once had I had a friend of mine do a retreat for a church, and we're trying to improve things. This was years ago, and so he
Right.
did all this cultural artifact stuff, and you're trying to boil down the church into 3 words, and I got it, and it was dumpy, campy, homey. And of course, I told the members, this is what we are. And I told the members of the church, they're horrified. You know, none of those words are right, but but there's a weird way in which this thing inverts all the way around, and the person soulfully singing "Shine, Jesus, Shine" at a funeral becomes so strange, it sort of regains authenticity, because it's like nobody who knows better would do this, and so this is all they know. It's sort of like, I've told this story before. I was in a hospital visiting a family, and there was a member of the family was dying this horrible death, and it was visceral, and this brother and sister grab each other, and they start singing. These are 2 people raised in the church, start
Hmm.
singing the Kenny Rogers song, you know, "The Gambler." You got to know
Okay.
when to hold. And I'm just sitting here watching this, thinking, of all the songs in the universe, this is the song this brother and sister have bonded over. And even
So
the
yeah,
Kenny Rogers song, "The Gambler," that too is almost this. I mean, it's just thick with tourism, and in a way,
yeah.
because, you know, who would really want to live in the Wild West?
Right, right. It's a romanticized version of
Yes. Yes.
a Wild West gambling casino where
Right. And this is
minus
what
the
these 2 people sing.
minus the spittoons,
Yeah.
you know. You know, no, I see this also at funeral services where people want to play the song on a recording of their, you know, that the loved one wanted. I think with funeral services, I mean, we show all the signs of having gone just completely off the edge. I mean, um, I mean, just we turn this into something that's a combination of abstraction and show. You know,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's just sad and pathetic. You know, and of course people want to remember, but it's like they're afraid of the real emotion. You know, what's supposed to happen at a funeral? Hey, this is your chance to cry in public. Go for it. You know, so play something that's genuine. You know, I mean, there are plenty of good songs that you could sing at a funeral, like together. When my mother died, I basically went to the pastor of our church in Alaska and said, here's what I want to have happen, and here's what I don't want to have happen. Because I was very clear about that. And
Sure you were.
yeah, yeah, I said, I'm not even bringing any pictures of my mother to put on anything. I am not, because it turns it into a show already.
Well, you're right, and funerals are, wow.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm sure you know.
oh yeah. But there's this weird way, and I'd see this in the Dominican Republic. So I'm working with Haitians, and these people, I mean, we are way out at the edge of the world in so many different ways.
Oh,
And
yeah.
when they wanted to do something important, they would often take the most, oh gosh, I don't even have the words for this. Um, it was stuff within their reach, but just barely. And but it seemed to have status and importance in the world. And so, you know, if they could get their hands on some crappy sound system, they would.
Hmm.
And, you know, I see this sometimes. I gotta be careful what I say, but I don't think anybody from these
Right.
communities watches my videos. But so you know, so I'll just tell the story. So there's this Nigerian Anglican church that rents from us. And if they have a special Sunday, because they rent from us for some reason, they really want me to come. And so I came to this one festival that they had, and there was she was quite clearly a Nigerian immigrant who came here quite young, and you're having sort of this festival service here in Sacramento of Nigerian immigrants. And so there's sometimes Christian praise, there's Anglicans, sometimes there's Anglican hymns, sometimes
Right.
there's contemporary Christian praise and worship, sometimes there's a song that they clearly brought over from Nigeria.
Right.
And then this young woman gets up to sing, and she's singing an American country western song about a truck and a dog. And I'm just kind of keeping an eye on the pastors because I'm thinking, what the heck are they making of
What's
this?
going on here?
And they're kind of looking at each other and like, is this okay? I mean, it's a dog and it's a love that didn't go right, and it's drinking and cheating. I mean, this is a Nigerian immigrant singing this song, and I'm just watching this thinking, what is going on? There's just layer on layer on layer on layer. But now, in some ways, she is being 100% authentic. But
Sure.
authentic to what? I'm trying to do the math and I can't do it. And I had these kinds of experiences in the Dominican Republic all the time. You're at the edge of the world, but in a sense, in order to achieve a degree of importance, validation, status, they would try to reach for something in, Nueva York, or, something from this culture, so that they could bring it in and appropriate it. And then there was one time when we visited a church which was way out in the world, and I was with pastors from the region, so they're from the town, so they're higher up in the status. We get out to this church, and usually they might have something they'd make into a drum, or somebody have a guitar, or something you could scratch or shake, and then be mostly audible. But in this church, they had some dude that was sitting there, and he was accompanying the church, kind of going bing, 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 just doing stuff out of his mouth. And then I'm looking at the other pastors like, I've seen a fair amount, but I haven't seen everything these other pastors have seen. And these other pastors, they're looking at it like, what the heck is, and we had a long drive back to the town, and they're like, what was happening in that church? But this is people. This is the crazy stuff we do. And then, okay, so what's authentic?
Well, this goes back to Rookmacher, and Rookmacher in his one of his discussions about art says we have lost a sense of decorum, and by that he does not mean the decor on the wall, nor the being proper. He says the old word was that things fit at a certain time in a certain way, so that a funeral was a time for a certain kind of behavior, a marriage or a harvest festival was a time for another. But I've seen marriages, and we could go off on that for a while. I'm sure
weddings too.
Yeah, weddings where it's just like you're just saying, like, it's like, okay, we're gonna take this and this and this, turn the Cuisinart on, and then make some really weird statements about how we'll be faithful till whenever it is convenient to us. And it's just very strange. And part of what I've seen is that we no longer have the ability to put ourselves fully into, for instance, our words. It's very easy for us these days to say all sorts of things like, yeah, I really want to do that, or yeah, I'd really love to, I'm going to come see you, and then never go see you. That this sense of commitment behind what we do. So instead we have this almost cut and paste. The word recombinant culture is something I've heard before, which I think is interesting, that you recombine elements over and over and over. But that was also a hearkening to recombined DNA. And so you have this culture of, it's really strange. I mean, I see the same thing developing here in Georgia sometimes. And that is, like it's, they don't have Christmas the way we have Christmas. And I did a whole video on this on my Georgian Crossroads channel. It was my biggest culture shock when I finally realized I'm not getting a Silent Night here, And so, but what you will find is they've appropriated certain things from the West, like all that endless Christian pop, not Christian, Christmas pop music, and you'll hear it in the malls, and it'll still be playing in February.
That's interesting.
Because they don't understand the context. But you see, what you're describing with the Nigerians and what you're
Yeah.
describing is this strange world where, and it's kind of like we invent all these little gizmos for sound or light or projection, and we end up doing strange things with them. Now, you suppose you could look at it all from the campy kind of, this is all just so trashy and funny. But I think that ultimately, for instance, a lot, I've told people, hey, if I die, don't celebrate. Don't have a celebration of my life, please. Mourn, because the celebration of the life it's a way of getting around the fact that it's a sad event.
Yeah. Well, I think of Greg Lowry. He's, his story with respect to Christianity is very interesting. And a definitive moment of that is, so he didn't have a romantic, but he had kind of a mentor relationship with a young woman, and they went to this church, and, she was just a rising star and things were going great. And then I think it was, I don't remember exactly what it was, but she died. And the thing that sort of pushed him over the edge in terms of the Christian faith, that he could no longer have anything to do with it, was at her funeral, they decided to do this whole celebration of life, and she is with Jesus. And so here at this funeral, we should all be happy. And he looked at this situation and said, this is a young woman brimming with potential, full of life. She had everything to give to the world, and now
Right.
she has died this tragic death. We should be mourning this. That's the only thing. And so, it's, but again, when you look at this weird thing that happened in Christian communities, I see it all the time. I hear it all the time. People want to, I have a very light hand with people with respect to funerals and weddings.
Sure.
If you want to do it,
Well, yeah, obviously.
I have limits, but I go a long ways with you.
Right.
But but
Well,
it all
that's
does
why.
speak to, and the question is, okay, what does it speak to? What is really going on with this insanity?
Right. Well, that's why I knew that the pastor at my church was not the person to be in charge of the wedding. I knew he was just officiating.
Right.
And so I said, I'm the person in charge. This is my mother.
Yeah.
And I want this to be a memorable and meaningful service. And I did certain things. I won't go into it all right now. But when it was done, I had more than one person come up to me and say, that was one of the best funerals I've ever been to. And what I did was, it was just like, it was the service, not much spice, but the focus on, I want to hear the bells. I don't want anything happening during the bells. Someone once, I was at a service where they were ringing the bells and showing a slideshow at the same time. From the childhood until
Sure.
and I'm sitting there going like, yeah, it just cuts the heart out of the bells. The bells are really important.
Well, and I think you have a sense of, you had a sense of coherence, that you understood the role that silence and the bells, I mean, decorum is the right word, but it's not just, we sort of have, okay, this is the way to do a funeral. Now we're living in this world of enormous pluralism. And so you have all of these cultures that are just all seeping up from below, but you had a sense of coherence that said, okay, this is how within this time and space, we're going to understand the time and the space and the music. We're going to get all the elements, and it's going to fit, which is, coherence is a key thing for a sermon, for a film, for a piece of music. And you have a sense of that because you understood the elements and how they cohere and what together they're designed to deploy and to produce.
Well, I also understand that the more media you put between things, people, events, the more you cut the event impact down. So like when I do puppet shows, I don't even use a microphone. You know, it's just like, it's raw sound, make people get in to hear it. And it works just because of the nature of the puppet show. I wouldn't say that for everyone, or that that's not a rule.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that there is a way, it all comes back to relationships.
Well, that's a
It's
good,
like,
that's a good rule. That's a really good rule.
yeah, for me, one of the ways I've come to understand evil is that anything that breaks a relationship is evil. Anything that encourages a relationship is good. But here's the problem. It's much easier to do evil than it is to do good. So I tell people, say you're walking down a street, like a busy street in New York City, one block. What can you do for anyone that is good, that is truly a good thing? Well, things like this. You stop a person from being run over by a car. But you can't know if you give someone money that they're just not going to go drink the final bottle of booze and die. You don't know the effect of that. So that's like, and so for me, like in New York City, the only people I give money to are the people I would form relationships with.
Right.
You see?
Absolutely.
But basically, there's nothing, you can't walk up to someone and go, oh, hi, you look lovely today. That could be interpreted so many ways wrong.
Yeah.
You know, you can't walk up to someone and say, hey, what's your name? You look interesting. Let's talk. You can't do that. So, but
Depends.
if you flip it around and you say, what can you do for someone that's really they're going to remember it for the rest of their life, and it's really going to be bad. Walking down that same street, your options are almost limitless.
Yeah.
You can push them into the road, you can kick them, you can just walk up and comment on their nose.
Yeah.
You can, just do endless terrible things to them, or even spiteful things, or even just weird things that they will go like, why did that person walk up to me and just start like dancing? I don't understand. It was weird. They will remember this, but not it hurts something. And in a sense, evil goes with entropy. Evil increases the entropy, whereas love is like brakes on the entropy. And in fact, my feeling is love isn't in the entropic world, because love is in time. And so love takes time, faith takes time. I guess the way I look at it is like, people talk about faith. How do you have faith and stuff? I said, well, faith is like trust, and trust takes time. So you're not going to just say, I believe instantly, and suddenly you have faith. You have to, my relationship with God does not happen simply because I will it into being. It has to be certain moments where I test that relationship. So coming to Georgia is one of those things. Moving to Alaska was one of those things. Moving to New York is one of these things. Taking my first major puppet journey into Europe was one of these things. And what I discovered is, it's never that it's as simple as you do this and, oh, everything is good now. What I've learned is there's a moment when the test comes. So once you've taken a serious choice as a result of your faith, you will then immediately, as I discovered when I got to Alaska, oh, by the way, you've got all your stuff in a container, and if you don't pay up your bill, and you were overweight, so you owe another, couple $1,000s on it if you don't pay that right away. Yeah, you don't have a job, but don't worry, you have to pay that, or we're shipping it back to Seattle and we're going to sell all your stuff. And I said, oh, I knew God well enough by that, going, okay, this is the test. Let's deal with this now. It's the same with Georgia. I got here. It's like, oh, didn't get the money from the French like I was supposed to. The Georgian job turned out to be nothing. And so that's, but I say, oh, but you know what came out of that? This, my channel, and I'm starting to get the kind of people writing to me now saying, thank you so much for what you're doing, and I wouldn't have done it probably had I not, I kind of saw, okay, they're giving me what I used to make in a day in the summer in Alaska for a month. So I better start thinking about something else here.
Most people don't make minimum wage on YouTube. You really don't. I mean, the amount of, as long as your videos are, And I saw your video on, why you can't
Monetize.
monetize.
Yeah, but I am trying to start a crowdfunder this week, and I've just run into my first thing. I don't know if I'm allowed to from Georgia.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to have to get someone back in America to
Bitcoin, my friend. You get a Bitcoin wallet. That's the only way it's going to
Well,
work.
but I've got to do a fundraiser to make otherwise I'll never get my stuff here.
Well, but again, with Bitcoin, you can just put up a wallet number and people can send you. That's the easy.
Yeah, but I think most
Bitcoin.
of the people I know are so low, low tech that they just aren't going to.
Yeah, well, then you'd have to somehow convert Bitcoin.
No. I'm going to do a fundraiser. I just have to get someone with an American number because I tried to have the code come through my phone here and it didn't. So I figured like, okay, I need to do it through an American phone number. Yeah. I'll work it out. Yeah. It's workable.
But I love the way this conversation went though, because I like, what you really landed on here at the end, that's some, because when you say the more media you put between the events, the more you cut the event down. And then you talk about anything that breaks a relationship is evil, anything that encourages a relationship is good. Because when I look at the local church, and when I look at now everybody in the United States has had this experience or a lot of people have had this experience of being, whether their church closed or stayed open, it didn't really matter. They started staying home. There's some question right now in terms of churches that about a third of people might sort of just drop out of church just because they got out of the habit. And, so you have all of this stuff, but and when you go into a local church, I mean, I always have conversations with people that they're interested in Christianity. They want to get into a local church, and, it would sort of be like, I mean, who of us would have joined our family if our families were consumer products? Think about that. You don't do that. You're born into the sucker. And you've got these two crazy parents, and every parent is nuts, at least to one degree or another. Some are better than worse, on and on and on. But you're born and raised into this thing. And I really like the way you did it, because of course it's time, and that time shapes you, and that time molds you for good or for ill. But, I didn't, I see all this. I see all this stuff being used, whether it's the Kenny Rogers Gambler song or this country music song sung by a young Nigerian teenager, about cheating and drinking and dogs and pickup trucks in a church service. I see all of this stuff, but at the same time, and even a Shine Jesus Shine in a really cringy funeral, another part of me sort of looks around and says, but this is, even though it's a really bad medium in order to try to connect himself or herself to that which they most desire and need, I'm not going to curse them because of their cultural poverty.
well, that's the thing. I've always tried to, it's like I've had people occasionally who will point to me and say, well, what do you think of that? Oh, no, you don't really know. But so I'll have to find a way to say it politely without saying, sometimes people can't handle it, what I'm thinking. Right. So, but I think that even, God respects even our fallen attempts. And in fact, all of us are making fallen attempts.
That's right.
And someone once said, the church is really a hospital for sinners. And I would say, and you never know who's in the next cot next to you, recuperating, or what they're coming out of. And they may not get all the way, they may, maybe I've come up with a few principles that are interesting, but I know better than to think that, that suddenly the world is going to adopt all the best Byrne ideas and stuff like this. But there was one point I wanted to make that I didn't make, going back to the centrality of relationship. As for me, it's, you see, the in the materialistic science world, the core of everything is matter.
Right.
But in information theory, in the last 20 years or so, they came up with an idea, and the smallest unit of information is the bit. And they say it comes from bit. So that every the smallest subatomic particle already has a bit of a code with it. And that to me opens up the fact that, oh, so what that means is there is everything is already, for instance, there isn't like like matter sitting off in a corner somewhere, isolated on a slide, somewhere in a bottle. It is already in a relationship.
Right.
So the key to everything is not the centrality of everything is not. This is why when people start telling me like, well, in this world, how can you know if there's a God? It's just like, because everything is a relationship. Relationship is the core of everything, not matter, not even energy. It's relationship. It's the thing that directs it all, because it is all directed. It's obviously all directed.
Yeah.
The reason I don't fall apart into a puddle of molecules and atoms is because it's all directed. This is no accident. And what's interesting, and then that bit, the fact that it's information at the core and not the thing, means that opens up the door for the logos. And the interesting thing about God is that God, as revealed as the Trinity, is not static, but is a relationship. And so to me, that means that whether it's science or whether it's religion, relationship is the core. And for us, in our world, in our lives, time is the way in which we enter that relationship. We don't know what it would be like after our deaths. We can't say that. But what we do know is in this world, I look at it as all being kind of a test. And part of that test is, are you willing to take the time? Are you willing to invest the time? Are you willing to take the time with people? So even everything ends up being, it's just like, I have cats that come to my window here in Georgia. Well, I've got 3 of them that I'm committed to. Then there's tomcats that come around that look pretty evil to me. It's just like, you're going to come and you're going to just basically rape these cats, and then you're going to eat the babies. Nah, I have no love for you. You're not good. But it's the same with people. It's just like, you can't commit yourself to everybody. So that there are lots of people who, not homeless people, but people, often older people begging on the streets here in Tbilisi. So I have one in every area I go to. If I see that person, they get money, because I can't give it to everyone, because there's just too many.
Yeah.
But I can, and what I've noticed is, if you do it to one person long enough, they start noticing that it's you.
Yeah.
And then they look up and they starting to brighten a little. Like you said, you're important.
Yeah. You've given a lot more than the money. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's probably a good place to land the plane here.
Yeah.
Well,
Paul,
as always, Byrne, it's always a joy to talk to you.
I'd like to get to Sacramento and have a real meetup.
Yeah, well, maybe one day I'll get to Georgia. I'd love to. So to me, Sacramento's map territory. I'd love to visit Georgia. So.
Oh yeah. No, I think you'd probably get an awful lot out of coming here.
I'm sure I would.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, have a good day. I will have a good night.
All right, Byrne. Sleep well.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.